threatened to wipe out the entire Iranian civilization with its 90+ million citizens. Then he embraced the sudden ceasefire, which he then seemingly undermined immediately thereafter. Then he claims victory and begins to distance himself from some of the key requirements of this ceasefire deal. It can be confusing. So I was hoping if anyone can shed some light on this, it would be you.
Yeah, I think it is somewhat confusing for sure. And I think because President Trump, frequently contradicts himself and says outrageous things, that it sometimes feels like it's hard to make sense of what's going on here. But I actually think it's quite straightforward. And I think if you look at his two tweets on Monday, it tells you a great deal. Now, what exactly am I saying? I think from an overarching perspective, you want to understand that President Trump is desperate to end this war. He fully understands that we are close to going off a precipice, that if this war is not shut down, we could end up in a global depression that's worse than we saw in the late 1920s. And he wants to do everything he can to avoid that. So you get two tweets on Monday morning and on Monday evening. And they're very different tweets for sure, but they both show evidence of the desperation. In the morning, he says that he's going to wipe Iran off the face of the earth. He's going to destroy Iranian civilization forever. This is a genocidal threat of the first order. This is the kind of language that you expect from Adolf Hitler, not from an American president. And what's going on here is he's desperate and he's threatening to annihilate the Iranians to get them to throw up their hands before he has to attack them that evening. He wants them to concede defeat. By the end of the day, he does a 180-degree turn and he says there's going to be a ceasefire. But most importantly, he says that the ceasefire will be based on Iran's 10-point plan. Now, you want to understand that there are two plans on the table. One is the 15-point American plan, which has all the maximalist demands of the United States and Israel. And then there's the Iranian 10-point plan, which has all the maximalist demands of the Iranians. And he says that the negotiations will take place on the basis of the Iranians' 10-point plan. This is really quite remarkable. He says the 10-point plan provides a workable basis for an agreement. And again, these are the maximalist demands of the Iranian government. He says, furthermore, in the tweet, that almost all of the points of contention between the two sides have been resolved. Again, remarkable. What's going on here? He's basically found the off-ramp, and the off-ramp is to concede defeat. It is the only off-ramp. He's long had two options. One is he could go up the escalation ladder, which is what he was threatening to do in the morning. But as I've argued for a long time, he can't go up the escalation ladder because he loses at every step. And the idea that he's going to obliterate Iran, this is not acceptable. This cannot be done. So he can't escalate. So he's got to find an off-ramp. But the only off-ramp is surrender, is to concede defeat. And what he does in the second tweet, again, he reverses gears, goes in the opposite direction, and he concedes defeat. He says, we're going to negotiate on the basis of the 10-point plan. This means none of our demands are going to be achieved, right? None of the big four demands that we made before the war started and after the war started are going to be realized. And we're going to negotiate on the basis of the maximalist demands that Iran has put on the table. So, what I'm saying to you, Glenn, is if you look at the morning tweet and you look at the evening tweet, you see that Trump is desperate. He's desperate to end this war. And he wants to get a ceasefire as quickly as possible. And then he wants to start negotiations.
But it seems like he wants to have it both ways because, yes, he concedes defeat, will accept, that Iran will set up a toll on the Strait of Hormuz, will put a ceasefire, which includes Lebanon, all these things. But then once the ceasefire is in place, he seems to be still wanting to claim victory. So now his tweets are about, well, you better not put any tolls on the Strait of Hormuz, and Lebanon's not included. It looks like he wants to have it both ways. He concedes defeat to get the ceasefire, but once he has the ceasefire, he wants to make this victory claim. Because I noticed that Pete Hegseth, he also tried to do this victory lap. He was just reading out all the people who are dead, all the people they killed, as a way of suggesting that this was victory. But did you see it in a similar way that did you see the attempt to claim victory here? Because what they had to agree to and what they're claiming, there seems to be a massive gap there.
Well, first of all, Glenn, they don't have a ceasefire because to have a ceasefire, the Iranians have to open the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians have refused to open the Strait of Hormuz because the Israelis are bombing Lebanon and attacking Hezbollah inside of Lebanon. And the Iranians say there will be no ceasefire. The Strait of Hormuz will not be opened until the Israelis stop attacking Hezbollah. And that hasn't happened. So the Israelis are undermining the ceasefire. You want to understand here that, first of all, there's the ceasefire, but then there's the negotiations to end the war. But before you can get to the negotiations, you have to get a ceasefire. But we don't have a ceasefire. That's a key point to understand. And the question is whether or not President Trump is going to be willing to lean on Netanyahu in a really serious way to get him to stop attacking Hezbollah. And then we'll get a ceasefire. Then the strait will be opened. But in terms of Hegseth and Trump declaring victory, this is putting lipstick on a pig. Come on, it's clear we've lost. You just want to think about it. We went into this war with 4 demands. 1 was regime change. 2 was Iran would get rid of its nuclear enrichment capability. 3 is Iran would eliminate all its long-range ballistic missiles. And 4, Iran would stop supporting the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. None of those 4 demands have been realized. None. Furthermore, Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz, which gives it enormous leverage. Furthermore, Iran still has a huge inventory of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones, which allows it to attack American bases in the region, American forces in the region, the GCC states that are allied with the United States, and Israel itself. So Iran is in an excellent position today compared to the position it was in on February 27th. And furthermore, as I said, President Trump, in his Truth Social post on Monday night, this is April 6th, said we're going to negotiate on the basis of the 10-point plan that the Iranians have put on the table. This is a clear defeat. And by the way, it's an even bigger defeat for Israel. And in Israel, there's all sorts of talk to that effect. The Israelis fully understand that if you look at where this train is headed, this is a catastrophic defeat for them. And of course, it is for President Trump as well.
Well, in the future as well, if Israel or any of the Western states would want to attack Yemen or attack Lebanon or genocide the Palestinians again, then Iran could just shut down or increase the toll. They have some different steps up the escalation ladder on the Hormuz. They can, block some ships. I don't know. This gives a massive instrumental power to the Iranians. I mean, they seem like they will exit this conflict as maybe superpowers a bit too much, but at least adjacent to a great power. This is quite a yeah, instrumental power they have, and as you said, they didn't have this before the war. So
Well, there's 2 points to be made. First of all, I think you don't want to overestimate how powerful a position Iran is in because of years of sanctions and because of the destruction we've wrought on Iran since February 28th. Iran, in a very important way, has been devastated. This is a country that has been wrecked in a lot of ways. So the idea that they're coming out of this war in great shape is wrong. Uh, they're going to have to spend many billions of dollars over many years to recover or to come close to recovering from all the damage that we and the Israelis have inflicted on them. Uh, there's no question, however, that given the fact that they control the Strait of Hormuz, they have a huge amount of leverage. And I take it a step further, Glenn. You want to remember that the Houthis are their allies. They're one of the three groups that the Iranians remain very close to: the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And the Houthis can shut down the strait that leads out of the Red Sea, as they have done in the past. So the Iranians, working with the Houthis, have the ability to shut down traffic coming out of the Red Sea, out of the Strait of Bab el-Mandab, and they have the capability to shut down the traffic coming out of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. So they do have enormous leverage. There's just no question about that. And this is going to present huge problems for the Israelis moving forward and for the Americans moving forward. And by the way, Glenn, just to take this a step further, if you look at the maximalist demands of the Iranians, one of them is that all American military forces leave the region. I find it hard to believe that that will happen. But I would note that we have 13 bases. Well, let me put it differently. We had 13 bases in the region on February 28th. And the New York Times reports that of those 13 bases, all of them have either been destroyed or badly damaged. I just want to think about that. Our presence in the Gulf has been seriously undermined by this war. The 13 bases that we depended on are basically gone or almost gone. And then you have to ask yourself the question, are the Gulf states that hosted us on these bases going to want the United States to come back and rebuild those bases? And as I said, there's also the question of whether we're going to want to do that, right? And then there is the point that the Iranians want us out of the region. So what our military presence in the region looks like when all the dust settles is hard to say, but we are going to be we're not going to be we're going to be less influential, have less power in the Gulf, less power projection capability in the Gulf when all is said and done than we had before February 28th.
it's quite extraordinary that how horrible this war was, and but again, it was a defeat. But I'm not sure what else Trump could have done than to accept defeat, because there was obviously a growing desperation. I was just wondering where you think most of the pressure came from. Was it that they were running out of missiles, interceptor missiles? In other words, the military? Was it the massive economic pressure, especially the growing oil prices? Or was it the fueling the political havoc at home, loss of voters? So what do you think, or are there some other dimensions to this disaster that we're missing?
Well, I think the secondary factor is that militarily, we couldn't figure out how to win the war in any meaningful way. Just the, ground invasion didn't make sense. We couldn't use the Navy to do much of anything. Uh, we just didn't have many options, and I think that was becoming manifestly clear. And you want to remember that in this rescue operation, where they got the second pilot out, we lost more aircraft that day than we have lost on any single day since the Vietnam War. And think about that. Since the Vietnam War, right, we have never lost as many aircraft in one day as we lost in this rescue mission. It just tells you that we were not doing well militarily. Uh, so I think that was of secondary importance. I think what's of primary importance here is what's happening to the world economy. I think the Chinese and the Russians are very scared about what the long-term consequences of this war are going to be for the world economy. And that includes the supply of food around the world, as well as oil and gas. And I believe the Chinese put pressure on the Iranians and talked at great length to the Pakistanis about getting Iran to come to the negotiating table and to work out a ceasefire and then get talking about settling this war. I think the Chinese understand full well that this will have disastrous consequences for everyone. And I want to underline that word, everyone, if this war continues. This war has to be shut down. If you look at what's happening in East Asia, and this includes countries like South Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, India, and the potential for really grave damage in China and countries like Russia, over the long term, everybody understands, and I believe the Trump administration understands, that we have to shut this one down. So I think you see Trump trying to do that. It's Trump who's actually been pushing hard for some sort of exit option, some way of settling this war. There's no question that Trump is deeply interested in doing that. But the Iranians, as I've long argued, have a vested interest in stringing this out. The Iranians don't want to settle this war quickly, because the longer the war goes on and the more damage that's done to the international economy and the deeper the panic that Trump is in, the more leverage the Iranians have. So it's no problem, I think, from the Iranian point of view, if this ceasefire doesn't work out, because as it goes on, the conflict, that is, their leverage increases. But nevertheless, I believe what happened here is that the Chinese, working with the Pakistanis and directly with the Iranians, put great pressure on Iran. They might have even brought the Russians in to put pressure on Iran to go to the negotiating table, because this one has to be shut down. So I think as you look at the situation today, you go back to those two tweets of President Trump on Monday, this is April 6th, and you ramp forward up to the present, and then you project out into the future. I think it's the global economy that really is driving the train here.
Yes, probably true. I think even now that, well, even if the war comes to an end now, the amount of damage that has already been done is quite tremendous, especially for the Europeans and the Asians. Well, you can maybe put Africa in that same category. But we've seen some reports of more U.S. troops heading to the region. I don't know, I haven't seen the exact numbers, but do you think this is? I mean, it seems unlikely that Trump wants to have another go at this, because I'm not sure what he's going to do with the troops. As you said, boots on the ground never really made any sense at all. Or is it just for pressure to hope that the U.S. will have a little bit more leverage in the negotiations? Because this is just a 2-week ceasefire supposed to produce an actual peace agreement. Then that peace agreement is going to be very difficult for Trump to get, because at the moment the ceasefire deal, which is a bit ambiguous, there doesn't seem to be a written paper which they can point to. It's it's easy for him to harmonize his claim for victory and also the need to, I guess, capitulate. But in an actual peace agreement, it's going to be very hard to square this. I'm just wondering how do you see the possible ways of this war actually ending? Because again, we have to get from a ceasefire to an actual peace agreement. Or do you think Trump's just gonna try to extend the ceasefire indefinitely and get, like a, I don't know, just try not to get any pen on paper so he doesn't have to admit defeat, essentially?
Glenn, he has to admit defeat. He admitted defeat Monday night. Again, we're on the precipice. We've got to shut this one down. He has no choice here. You talk about sending ground forces to the region, and a ground force option, that's really going to work well. That's going to get a quick agreement. Are you kidding? Right? That's just going to make a bad situation worse. There's no ground force option here. There's no naval option. There's no air option. I guess, he could use nuclear weapons and destroy Iran forever. We could do that. We have that capability. Is he going to do that? No, he's not going to do that. So he's got to shut this one down. And he's between a rock and a hard place because the Israelis won't cooperate with him. The Israelis won't even allow him to get a ceasefire. Again, the Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed. The only ships that get through are the ones that the Iranians let through. So he can declare victory and talk about, the fact that we've gotten everything we wanted and our goals have been achieved and so forth and so on. But nobody's going to believe that. We lost. The Israelis lost. The problem is that there are just so many alternative media outlets where this is all made clear, your show being one of them, that they can't put lipstick on a pig and get away with it. Pete Hegseth can say we won. Donald Trump can say we won. But who believes that? Hardly anybody. You see this in the Israeli case. They'll be talking about all the wonderful things they've done because the government has a vested interest in saying that. But all sorts of people are going to point out that this is a ludicrous argument. They didn't win. They lost. So what I would say to President Trump, and I don't think he needs me to tell him this because I'm sure his advisors are telling him this thing has to be shut down immediately. I am sure that this is exactly what Vance is telling him. I'd bet a lot of money on that this has to be shut down. And they're sending Vance to head this team of negotiators because they know Vance, is capable of reaching some sort of agreement. You don't want to depend on Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I mean, these are basically Israeli assets, not to mention the fact they're incompetent. They have a demonstrated record of incompetence now. So you want someone like Vance in charge, and hopefully he can shut this down. But it'll be tough. Glenn, just to go back to the Ukraine war and think about all the endless conversations we've had on ending the war in Ukraine. President Trump was determined to end the war in Ukraine even before he came into office. But if he didn't settle that war before he came into office, he was going to settle it after he came into office. And he's been a colossal failure, right? He and his lieutenants have bumbled around and really made a hash of the negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. It's the gang that can't shoot straight, right? Well, here we are now trying to shut down another war, and it's the Trump administration again. And the question you have to ask yourself is, can they do it? If the cast of characters involve just President Trump, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, I'd say we're in deep trouble. But Vance is our great hope here. He's the new boy in town in terms of negotiating with an adversary. And we're just all hoping that he can pull it off. I'm sure the Chinese and the Russians, not to mention the Indians, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Indonesians, people all over Africa, people all over the world are pulling for Vance to work out a ceasefire than to sit down and negotiate some sort of settlement so that we can get the strait opened and we can get the fertilizer. Well, we have to get that fertilizer flowing, and we can get the oil and gas flowing as well. We're not going to immediately go back to the status quo ante in terms of how much those goods come out of the Gulf, but it'll be a good start. But we have to do this immediately. And I believe that President Trump understands that. It's just difficult to miss what's going on here. I'm sure that countries all around the world are calling the White House every day saying this is a colossal disaster. Something has to be done. And again, I think the Chinese and the Russians fully understand this. These are the responsible stakeholders in the system, the Chinese and the Russians, not the United States. But I think at a certain point, even the United States, even the Trump administration gets the message. This is my reading of the situation. And again, Glenn, I would say just go back and look at the 2 True Social posts that he wrote on Monday. What he said in the morning about annihilating Iranian culture, and then look at what he said in the evening. Did a 180-degree turn and said we accept Iran's 10-point plan as a basis for negotiations. This is truly remarkable, and it reflects the desperation. And by the way, just if he doesn't understand, if I'm wrong, if he and his lieutenants don't understand, just give them another week or 2. They'll understand what's going on here in terms of the world economy.
I think we should all probably be happy that Vance will take over some negotiations, but something good could come from this. So if he is successful, at least he should be more successful than Witkoff and Kushner, then perhaps Trump will have the wisdom to also send him to Moscow, because it seems more, well, Vance seems more genuine, not just in opposing the Iran war, but actually wanting to put an end to the Ukraine war as well. He doesn't seem to have any more appetite for throwing more lives and money into this big black hole. So again, something good could come from this, perhaps. But it is.
Can I make just one quick point on what you said? You do want to remember, though, that if Vance negotiates a settlement in which we lose, and this is certainly true in the Gulf, and I believe it would be true in settling the Ukraine war, the right in the United States, the neoconservatives, which are a key element in the Republican Party, will blame him and go after him hammer and tong. So you just want to understand that politically, for Vance, he's in a very dangerous situation. There's no question that for the good of the United States, for the good of the Trump presidency, and for the good of the world, we need him to behave in smart and brave ways to end this disaster. We just need him to do that. But if he's successful, and let's hope he is, he will pay a political price here in the United States. And the question you have to ask yourself is whether that will affect how he approaches these negotiations. He is surely aware of the point that I just made. I mean, he's a very smart man. Whether you agree with his policy views or not, he's a smart man, and he has surely figured this out. But let's just hope that, he puts the good of the country and really the good of the world. It sounds funny saying that, but really we are talking about the good of the world here, above his own narrow political interests, and does work hard to get a settlement and is successful.